I never thought that my 62nd birthday would end with me standing outside my own daughter's house, holding a homemade cake while the front door quietly clicked shut behind me. There wasn't a storm, no harsh words or plates thrown, just that soft click, like the end of a conversation that was never really had. And in that moment, under the unforgiving heat of a midday sun, I realized something colder than any winter wind. I was no longer part of her story. My name is Marion Hayes, retired school librarian, widow of 13 years, and until this afternoon, I believed I was still welcome in my daughter's life. Claire had invited me down for the weekend. Just a small get-together, she'd said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nothing fancy. Just you, me, and Thomas. Like old times. I'd been living with Claire for the past 6 months, ever since my hip surgery. The idea was temporary support, mutual, even. She got help with childcare, I got a warm bed, and a chance to see my grandson every morning. I paid for groceries, helped with laundry, drove Thomas to piano when Claire worked late. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for much of anything, just presents. So, when she offered to host a low-key birthday, I agreed. I even baked my own cake, a lemon chiffon, the kind she used to beg for when she was little. I decorated it with sugared violets and wrote my name on it with trembling icing. For Marion, it said in lilac loops. I wrapped it carefully and carried it to her porch with both hands. The house was humming with music when I arrived. Not the gentle kind that settles into the walls, but sharp, curated playlists, trendy, upbeat, engineered for mood. I stepped in and immediately felt out of place. Claire greeted me with a quick hug and a distracted glance over my shoulder. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, before darting off toward the kitchen, where a ring light stood like a sentry beside the fridge. That's when I noticed the phone balanced on a tripod, streaming her day in the life vlog to a few hundred people. "Birthday lunch with my beautiful mama," the caption read. And yet, no one looked at me. Thomas waved from the couch, face buried in a tablet. I smiled. At least someone was happy I was there. The lunch was rushed. Store-bought salads. Bottled lemonade. Claire barely sat down. She kept adjusting the camera angle, fussing with her hair. Once, she asked me to hold the cake up for a photo, no candles, no song. "Just tilt it more toward the light, Mom." I obeyed. Then came the live Q&A. It wasn't part of the plan, at least not one she had told me about. Claire turned on her stream again, this time on the patio. "Okay guys, AMA time, ask me anything." Yes, that's my mom behind me. She's super sweet, but like old school. You know how it is. I was sipping tea when I heard it. That little dismissal. Old school. Super sweet. It sounded affectionate to the untrained ear. But to a mother who once taught her daughter how to read, it sounded like erasure. She glanced at me once, said, "You okay to take Thomas inside? He's getting fussy." I nodded and took my grandson's hand. Even though he wasn't fussy, he was just bored. Inside, the cake sat untouched. I checked the clock. It was 3:17 p.m. I had been at my own birthday party for over 3 hours and hadn't blown out a single candle. Not that I expected grandeur, but I had expected to matter. An hour later, Claire found me in the hallway folding napkins that didn't need folding. "Hey, Mom," she said, adjusting her microphone. "Would you mind heading out for a bit? Just until I wrap this segment. I'm filming a bit about setting boundaries with overbearing parents, and I don't want the energy to feel weird." I blinked. My breath caught in my throat like a swallowed pebble. She smiled, soft and practiced. "You know how the internet is. Super sensitive." I nodded slowly. "Of course. I wouldn't want to ruin your energy." I left the house with the cake still in its box. No candles, no slices, not even a thank you for baking it. Outside, the sun beat down on my cardigan. I stood by the mailbox, hands trembling around the ribbon-tied handles. My birthday, and I was dismissed from it like a stagehand who wandered into the spotlight. A neighbor drove past and waved. I waved back with a stiff hand. I wasn't sure where to go. I didn't have friends in town anymore. I'd sold the old family home last year to help Claire refinance hers. She had never said thank you for that either. I sat on the bus stop bench 2 blocks down, cake on my lap. It looked absurd, like I was delivering it to someone else. And maybe I was. Because in that moment, the truth landed like a slow, aching realization. I was no longer the guest of honor. I was the guest to be moved off screen. I had been invited not for love, but for optics. The sun dipped behind a row of hedges. I opened the box slowly and looked at the cake. For Marion, it said. The icing had smudged slightly from the ride. I took a small bite.
It was dry.
Too much flour. Too little sugar. I laughed, once low and bitter. The first birthday I'd spent alone since Claire was born. And I didn't even rate a slice. The cake sat beside me on the bus stop bench, slowly sinking under the weight of its own forgotten celebration. I hadn't realized how heavy it was until I stopped carrying it for someone else. Cars drifted by. A breeze picked up. Somewhere a child laughed, probably playing in a yard with people who still remembered the point of birthdays. I stared down at the sugared violets, now wilted, their color bleeding into the frosting. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, like a centerpiece removed before the table was even set. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire. Sorry if you felt weird today. The stream went longer than I thought. You can come back now if you want. Just please don't be too emotional around Thomas. I stared at the message. Too emotional. The woman who once held her through midnight fevers, who stood through every dance recital with sore feet and a proud heart, was now an energy risk. I placed my phone beside the cake and let the screen dim. That's when I heard the voice. Marion? I turned. It was Janice, a neighbor from Claire's block. Widowed, quiet, the kind who always waved but never lingered. She held a shopping tote and wore thick-soled sandals and a linen scarf, the kind you wear when you've stopped dressing for attention and started dressing for truth. I saw you walk out earlier, she said, carefully lowering herself beside me. With the cake and all. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. So I smiled, brittle and small. Birthday? She asked gently, nodding toward the box. I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out 2 paper plates and a plastic fork still wrapped in napkin. Well, she said, let's not waste it. And we ate. There, on a splintered bench, with traffic hissing by and the sky bleeding into dusk, we shared the only 2 slices that cake would ever serve. It's a little dry, I murmured. Janice grinned. That's how you know it was made with love. I laughed. A real laugh this time, the kind that surprised me. It felt strange to be seen. Not performed for. Not posed with. Just seen. We talked until the streetlights flickered on. She told me about her late husband, about her grown daughter who only called when she needed tax advice, and about the little herb garden she kept by her kitchen window. I told her about Thomas, about lemon chiffon, about how strange it felt to be a mother who raised a daughter who now curated affection like content. When I finally stood to leave, Janice touched my wrist gently. Don't go back there tonight, she said. Not like this. I hesitated. She made space for a camera, she said. Not for you. There's a difference. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Where would I go? My place, she said simply. Just for the night. We'll split the leftover cake and pretend it was always meant for 2. I followed her. Her home was small but full. Books stacked 2 deep on the shelves, lavender soap in the bathroom, a framed photo of her daughter on the mantel with a birthday card still tucked behind the edge. The air smelled like cinnamon and something older. Kindness. We drank chamomile tea. We didn't speak much after that. She handed me a soft pair of pajamas and a quilt with her initials stitched into the corner. I lay down in her guest room with the moonlight spilling across the floor, and I whispered the words I hadn't said out loud all day. Happy birthday, Marion. It was the quietest celebration of my life. And yet it was the first one in years that didn't require me to shrink. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside the window and the smell of scrambled eggs. Janice was already at the table, reading the paper. I found something, she said, sliding a tablet across to me. Look. There on the screen was Claire. Her face lit up in a thumbnail. How to Set Boundaries with Toxic Parents, the title read. I pressed play. She was smiling, talking gently, weaving words with finesse. It's okay to distance yourself from people who drain your energy, even if they're family, especially if they've never learned to let you grow. My image flashed in the background, a blurry silhouette by the sink. The caption, "Sometimes you have to protect your peace, even from the people who raised you." My hands trembled. She hadn't just excluded me. She'd reframed me, rewritten me into a cautionary tale. A shadowy mother too rigid to adapt, too sensitive to evolve. The woman who had once built her science fair volcano and taught her how to thread a needle was now the villain of her personal growth narrative. And the worst part? People believed her. The comments poured in. OMG same. My mom is exactly like this. Thank you for this. Boundaries are so important. Ugh, boomers just don't get it. My chest tightened. I wasn't just forgotten. I was repurposed. I had been cast as the foil in a performance I never auditioned for. Janice reached over and placed her hand on mine. You don't have to be okay with this, she said quietly. I nodded, staring at the paused frame. My own blurred outline turned into a symbol. That's when something in me shifted. Not anger, not grief, not even revenge, but a quiet, crystalline clarity. If Claire wanted a story to tell the world, maybe it was time I told mine. Janice poured another cup of coffee, the kind brewed slow and rich with a cinnamon stick floating inside. I sat across from her in borrowed slippers, feeling like both a guest and something else, something that had been locked away too long and was just beginning to stir. She made me her antagonist, I said finally. My voice was calm, but every word felt like pulling thread from a wound. And I let her. Janice didn't speak. She just turned the volume down on the tablet and slid it aside. I used to think love meant absorbing, I continued. Absorbing mood swings, absorbing criticism, absorbing silence when it came like frost through the phone. I took a deep breath. But now, I think love might also mean saying enough. Janice reached into a drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it to me. I printed something for you, she said, just in case. Inside were pages, statements, receipts, bank transfers, a few emails. The one where I agreed to help co-sign Claire's mortgage. The text where she asked for help with her student loan balance because her sponsorship fell through again. The grocery list I'd covered for 4 months straight last winter when she claimed the cost of organic food was triggering her financial anxiety. She said you were a guest, Janice said gently. These say otherwise. I stared at the numbers. You've given more than your time, Marion. You gave your name, your savings, your sleep. The words settled over me like ash. Why do I feel guilty? I whispered. Because you're kind, she said. And kindness doesn't expect receipts, but survival does. Later that day, I sat in Janice's den and started writing. Not for the internet, not for Claire, for me. The first line, I am not the woman she describes. It was more than a defense. It was a reclamation. I started listing everything I'd done since moving in: chores, financial help, childcare, cooking, emotional labor. Each entry sharpened my memory, not just of what I had done, but what I had allowed to be erased. I remembered the time she asked me to babysit while she recorded a self-care Saturday routine for her YouTube channel. I sat in the dark with Thomas for over an hour because he had a fever, while she lit candles, filmed skincare close-ups, and narrated softly, sometimes we all need to detox from negativity. The next morning, she edited me out of a family photo. You blinked, she'd said. Didn't match the vibe. I'd laughed it off. I always laughed it off. Until now. Because now I saw the pattern. She didn't just push me out, she repurposed me. And the worst part? I'd given her the tools. That night, Janice made stew. The kind you can only make with time. We ate in quiet companionship while Claire's face flashed again across her tablet. Another stream, another story. This time, she was answering questions. What's the hardest boundary you've ever set? Someone asked. She paused, then said with a half smile, asking my mom to leave on my birthday. It felt harsh but necessary. The chat exploded with praise. So brave. That must have been so hard. You did the right thing. I sat there, watching her rewrite my exit as her own act of empowerment. I was no longer a person. I was content. She knows exactly what she's doing, I murmured. Janice nodded. And maybe it's time you do, too. The next morning, I emailed someone I never thought I'd contact again. Her name was Carly, an old colleague from the library system who'd since become a part-time writer for a digital column on aging and relationships. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. My subject line: a mother's silence doesn't mean she agrees. I told her everything, not in rage, but in record, about the co-signing, the bills, the caretaking. I attached screenshots, invoices, and Claire's social posts that contradicted every part of her toxic parent branding. Carly replied within the hour. Marian, if you want to tell your story, I'll help. Anonymously, if needed. This isn't drama. It's a cautionary tale, and it matters. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Let's tell it. But not for vengeance. For the women who feel erased in their own homes. Later that evening, Janice and I sat on her porch, the sun sliding behind distant rooftops. You know what I remember most about birthdays when I was little? I asked. She shook her head. It wasn't the cake or the gifts. It was the moment someone looked at me and meant it when they said, I'm glad you were born. Janice turned, eyes soft. Well, Marian, I'm glad you were born. I smiled. And for the first time in days, I believed it. Carly moved fast. Within 3 days, she sent me a draft of the piece, 1,200 words, titled plainly, The Cost of Silence, When Mothers Become Props. I read it twice before I allowed myself to breathe. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bitter. It was careful, truthful. It laid out the facts. A mother moves in with her daughter post-surgery, helps financially and emotionally, only to be quietly erased and rewritten for a digital audience. Carly changed the names, blurred the location, but the shape of the story was unmistakable. She frames you as controlling, Carly had said during our phone call. But what she actually did was curate you, just like her content. Kept what was photogenic, cropped what wasn't. That hit hard. Claire had always been good at curating. Even before followers and filters, she knew how to adjust lighting in a room. She could lie without technically lying, just enough omission, just enough tilt to turn sympathy in her favor. I asked Carly to wait before publishing. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed time to prepare for what I wasn't even certain. Fallout? Silence? Or the possibility that the truth wouldn't matter at all. I spent that time compiling. Janice helped. We spread everything across our kitchen table like puzzle pieces, bank statements, screenshots, shared photos, old texts, even Claire's YouTube captions. She said you were draining, Janice muttered, skimming one post, but here you are cooking dinner while she's filming night routines. I nodded. Her story needs a villain. I was just the most convenient one. Janice looked up. What if she fights back? She will. I wasn't naive. Claire had built her brand around redemption arcs. Setbacks were her fuel. Followers loved vulnerability, but only the kind that still made you likable. A mother's boundaries didn't trend. A daughter's bravery did. So I planned for pushback. I created a folder on a USB drive labeled simply Perspective. Inside were 3 subfolders. Financial contributions, my part of the mortgage, the grocery budgets I covered, the time I bailed her out after a brand deal fell through. Emotional labor, screenshots of late-night texts, notes left on the fridge with encouragement, the video of me reading to Thomas while Claire live-streamed a skincare haul. Contradictions, Claire saying on camera that I was distant, just days after she posted a throwback thanking me for being her rock. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building an anchor, something to hold on to when the storm came. And it did. Carly published the article the following Monday. It started as a slow hum, shares among women's groups, a few comments on the parenting forums, a handful of messages to Carly asking, "Was this about?" But then someone made the connection. A clip surfaced of Claire's birthday live stream. The one where she thanked her followers for being her real family. In the corner of the screen, barely visible, was my reflection in the kitchen window, holding a cake. I never said a word in that clip. I never even stepped into frame. But someone paused it, zoomed in, and asked in the comments, "Wait, was that her mom? The one she said was controlling?" The question ignited a fuse. The next day, someone stitched together a video comparing Claire's claims with timestamps from her vlogs, her saying I was financially manipulative side by side with a clip of me handing her grocery money, her saying I hovered constantly next to footage of her asking me to watch Thomas. "Just for a few hours, Mom, please." The contradictions weren't loud. They were quiet, which made them more damning. And then came the podcast. A mid-sized show, Mothers Between the Lines, reached out to Carly. They'd seen the article, read between the lines. They wanted to talk, not with Claire, but with me. I said no at first. I didn't want my voice becoming another piece of content. But then I got an email from a woman named Ruth. She wrote, "My daughter told her friends I was toxic too. I believed her until I started reading what she posted. Thank you for making me feel sane." I read that line 5 times. Then I said yes. The podcast recorded anonymously. My voice was slightly altered. My name changed. But everything else, the pain, the history, the facts, were real. I told my story simply. I moved in to help. I gave what I had. I asked for dignity in return. And when I wasn't given that, I left. The episode was titled, "When the Background Speaks." It aired on a Wednesday. By Thursday, the clip had over 70,000 plays. By Friday, someone posted it in the comments of Claire's most recent video. Then the tide shifted. Claire released a statement on Instagram. It was carefully worded. "Family dynamics are complex," she wrote. "People see things differently. I stand by my truth, but I also believe in healing." But no one was fooled. The top comment read, "So why'd you edit her out of your birthday if it wasn't about image?" Another, "Truth doesn't have versions. It has receipts." Her followers began to splinter. Not all, but enough. Enough to show her story wasn't airtight anymore. She posted less after that. No more live streams. No more soft-lit monologues about overcoming generational trauma. Just silence. And in that space, something remarkable happened. I got letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. From women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, mothers, aunts, grandmothers. All saying the same thing. "Thank you for reminding us we're not crazy. We're not overbearing. We're not disposable." I didn't write back to all of them, but I read every single one. Some were scrawled in ink, tear-stained. Others were emails with attachments, photos of grandkids they hadn't been allowed to see, notes from children who now referred to them only in past tense. They had stories too. Stories like mine. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't just spoken for myself. I had cracked a silence so many had mistaken for peace. There's a peculiar kind of grief that comes when you're still alive in someone's life, but only as a distortion. After the podcast aired and the trickle of attention grew into something louder, I expected Claire to call. Not because I hoped for reconciliation, those days were gone, but because I knew her. I knew she couldn't stand not controlling the version of the story people were telling. Instead, she posted a photo. It was of her and Thomas at the local botanical gardens. Her caption read, "Healing in nature. Boundaries can be beautiful." I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't tagged. But in the lower corner of the image, cropped out just enough, was the edge of a birthday card. It was mine. My handwriting unmistakable. The one I had tucked under Thomas's pillow 3 months ago. The last gift I gave before she asked me to be less visible. It said, "To my sweet boy, always remember, your voice matters." She'd used it. Without credit. Without context. My words became a prop in her redemption arc. I didn't comment. I didn't message her. I simply saved the post. Not out of spite, but because I was done pretending this wasn't intentional. "She's still using you," Janice said, peering over my shoulder as I stared at the screen. I nodded. Because she knows the story isn't hers anymore, I murmured. I thought going public would feel like an ending. It didn't. It felt like a mirror finally turned back toward me. And I didn't always like what I saw, because the truth was, I had given Claire everything. But I'd also trained her to believe I would never leave, never draw a line, never say no. I taught her that love was self-erasure. That's not an easy thing to admit, even to someone like Janice, who saw through facades like they were glass. I gave her everything I never had, I told her one night, sipping tea on her porch, because I wanted her life to feel full, not lonely. Janice tapped her fingers gently on the cup's handle. But did you ever teach her what to do with fullness? Or just how to receive it? That question lingered. I didn't answer, because the truth required more silence than I could bear that night. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Thomas. Claire hadn't blocked me from his tablet yet. Maybe she'd forgotten. Or maybe some part of her hoped I wouldn't reach out. He answered on the second ring. "Grandma?" His voice was soft, tentative. I smiled through the sudden ache. "Hi, sweet pea." He told me about school, about the art project he was working on, about how their new sitter didn't like peanut butter and jelly mixed, which he thought was criminal. I laughed, really laughed. Then he said something that gutted me. "Mom said you're mad because you don't like her job, but I told her you're just really quiet sometimes." I blinked back the sting behind my eyes. She said that. Yeah. And then she cried, but not like real crying, like movie crying. I didn't respond, not with anger, not with defense, just quiet. "I miss you," he whispered, "even if you're old school." I chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "I saved your card," he said, "the one that said my voice matters." That nearly undid me. I whispered, "It still does. Always." Before we hung up, he said, "Can I call you again? If Mom says it's okay?" "Yes," I said, "if she lets you, or even if she forgets." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I just sat in Janice's living room, the silence humming like a presence. The next morning, I mailed Thomas a new book, Charlotte's Web. I underlined a single sentence. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. I included a note. Use your words. They'll build the life you want someday. Later that week, Carly emailed me again. The story had been picked up, syndicated across a few parenting and elder rights blogs. One of them wanted to do a follow-up. Not about the daughter, she clarified. About you. What it means to reclaim identity after being reduced to a character. I hesitated. I didn't want fame, or to go viral. But I also didn't want the world to think my voice ended where hers began. So I agreed. This time, I used my name. They published the follow-up piece on a Thursday morning. No pseudonyms this time. No voice modulation. Just a simple headline. Marian Hayes speaks, when a mother refuses to disappear. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't revenge-laced. It was measured. Human. Carly wrote it with the care of someone who understood the difference between exposure and clarity. It was filled with quotes, my own this time, not repurposed or cropped, and included a single, devastating photo. Me, seated in Janice's garden, sunlight spilling over my shoulder as I looked out of frame.
No filter.
No pose. Just presence. The response was quiet at first. And then, like a tide pulled back too long, it surged. Comments flooded in. This reminds me of my own mom. I treated her like a placeholder until she left. I always thought my mom was overbearing. Maybe she was just exhausted. Thank you, Marian, for saying what my grandmother never got the chance to. For the first time in months, I wasn't being spoken about. I was being heard. And Claire? Claire went silent. Not just quiet. Not posting aesthetic photos quiet. Vanishing quiet.
No streams. No reels.
No quotes about setting boundaries or healing through hard decisions. Just a blank page. Her carefully curated grid became a ghost town. One by one, her followers stopped tagging her. Comments dried up. The feedback loop of affirmation broke. And I didn't gloat. because I finally understood what it was. Claire had built a house out of stories she didn't own. And now that house was folding. Janice found me on the porch that evening with a printed out copy of the article in her hands. "I read it 3 times, she said. I smiled. "You think I said too much?" She shook her head. "I think you finally said just enough." Later, we sat together as the sky dimmed, 2 women who had outlived being ignored. Janice told me about her own daughter, how their last phone call had ended with the words, "You just don't understand boundaries." I told her, Janice whispered, "I understand them now. I just wish I didn't have to." We toasted with apple cider and said nothing more. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Claire called. Not a text, not a video message, a real analog phone call. I stared at her name on the screen for 6 full rings. I let it go to voicemail. She tried again that night, then again the next morning. Finally, I answered. I didn't speak first. Neither did she. I could hear the silence between us. Years of swallowed apologies, of repressed gratitude, of misplaced blame. Then, finally, she spoke. I didn't know it would get this big. I breathed slowly. It didn't get big, Claire. It got honest. She was quiet. I heard the catch in her throat. I thought I was protecting myself. You were protecting your image. I was trying to be real. No, I said gently. You were trying to be liked. She didn't argue. That silence again. Then, Thomas misses you. I miss him too. You wrote to him? I'll always write to him. You can't copyright love, Claire. She gave a half laugh. Or maybe it was a sob. What do we do now? I paused. You rebuild, Claire. Not for followers. Not for optics. For him. For yourself. What about us? I closed my eyes. The question I dreaded. The one she never asked before the articles, before the podcast, before the silence got loud enough to hear. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know where we won't start. At the beginning of your script. There was another long pause. She didn't hang up.
She didn't yell.
She just stayed. I didn't mean to erase you, but you did. I know. She sighed, raw and real. I don't know how to fix that. I nodded. Then maybe don't. Maybe just start telling the truth. When we ended the call, I didn't feel closure. I felt clearing. A clearing in the forest after the fire. Smoke still lingering, ash at your feet, but light pouring in where there used to be dark. I sat on Janice's porch and watched the wind carry away the last of the summer leaves. Maybe, just maybe, the next chapter wouldn't be about erasure at all. Maybe it would be about emergence. The day after Claire called, I returned to my old house. Not to move back in.
Not yet. Just to see it.
To stand on the sidewalk and remember what it looked like before it became a set piece for someone else's content. Before it had ring lights in the corners and curated sadness for engagement. It was early morning. The street was quiet. Dew glistened on the lawn Claire once begged me to help seed. I remembered her, 6 years old, planting wildflowers and insisting we name each one. She called the first sprout Hope. Now, Hope bloomed nowhere in the yard. The flower beds were empty. But I brought something with me, my key. It wasn't dramatic. I unlocked the door, walked in. The house smelled faintly of lavender and electronics. Everything was still in its place. The white minimalist shelves, the gold-rimmed mirror in the entryway, the scentless candles Claire claimed helped her set intention. But the room felt vacant, like it had been paused, not lived in. I walked past the kitchen, past the tripod still folded beside the fridge, past the sign that read, "You are the creator of your own peace." It rang hollow. Then I opened the door to the guest room, the room I had painted, the one I had quietly paid to furnish after she insisted she couldn't afford neutral aesthetic bedding. It was empty. No linens. No photos. The lamp was unplugged. It didn't look abandoned. It looked sanitized, scrubbed of anything too warm, too human. My quilt, handmade, was gone. My slippers gone. Even the drawer where Thomas once kept his superhero socks was bare. I stood in the center of the room and let the stillness settle around me. This was the space I had retreated to when Claire was overwhelmed, when Thomas had nightmares, when the dishwasher broke and I hand-washed plates until midnight. And now it didn't even have my name on it. That was the hardest part, maybe. Not the betrayal, not the manipulation, but the erasure. There's something bone deep about having your presence scrubbed so clean that even the air forgets how you used to breathe in it. But I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the closet, and there on the top shelf was a single box, shoebox-sized, untouched. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside were photos. Me, Claire, and Thomas at the lake. Me holding her as a baby. Claire in high school, grinning with cake on her chin. Most of them had been clipped from albums. A few still had sticky edges from old scrapbooks I had made. There was also a card, a birthday card, to Mom. Thank you for always being my foundation. Dated 3 years ago. I sat down on the edge of the stripped bed and ran my fingers over the handwriting. Her loops, her curls, the sincerity that hadn't yet calcified into performance. I tucked the box under my arm and left. Back at Janice's, I unpacked the photos onto the dining table. She stood behind me, arms folded, eyes soft. She saved them, I whispered. Of course she did, Janice replied. Erasure and regret are twin sisters. One always follows the other. That night, I took a long bath, the kind where the water stills your pulse and the silence cradles something fragile. Then I sat down at Janice's kitchen table and started drafting something new. Not an article, not a call-out, a letter to Thomas. I wrote slowly, with a pen that skipped now and then. But I didn't erase. I wanted him to see the imperfections, the reality. Dear Thomas, there are things you'll hear as you grow. Stories. Some from your mom, some from people online, some whispered in doorways when you think no one is listening. I can't promise I'll always be there to explain them, but I can promise this. The truth doesn't hide. It waits, quietly, until it's needed. You've probably heard things about me. Some true, some not, but none of them are big enough to contain the full picture. So here's mine. I loved your mother before she had words. I loved her when she pushed me away. I love her now, even from this distance. But love doesn't mean becoming invisible. It doesn't mean letting someone turn you into a character in their play. You'll grow up and form your own ideas about us both. That's okay. I just hope one day you ask me directly, because I'll answer honestly.
No lights, no filters.
Just me.
Love, Grandma.
I folded the letter, placed it inside a blank book, and wrapped it in brown paper. Janice watched me address it.
No bow.
No note, just Thomas's name. You sure she'll let him open it?
I'm not, I said.
But I know he'll know it's from me. That weekend, I returned to the house again, this time with Janice. We walked the perimeter together. I showed her the spot where Thomas used to build fairy forts out of sticks, where Claire once scraped her knee chasing fireflies, where I used to sit with tea and think, maybe I've done enough for today. Why are we here? She asked gently. Because I want to see if it still feels like mine. Does it? I looked at the windows.
The door.
The porch with the chipped railing I once painted while Claire filmed a TikTok inside. No, I said. But I'm not mourning that anymore. She raised an eyebrow. I'm planning what I want to build next. By midweek, I had made a decision. I wasn't going back. Not just to Claire's house, but to the version of myself that only existed when I was needed. I no longer wanted to live like borrowed furniture. No more tiptoeing around lighting setups and camera angles. No more silence exchanged for the privilege of staying invisible. I wanted something of my own. Something small, quiet, but mine. Janice had been watching me closely since the interview went live. She never pried, but I could feel her observing the shift in me. The way I carried my shoulders differently. The way my voice had stopped hesitating at the ends of sentences. One morning, over oatmeal and black coffee, she slid a real estate section across the table without a word. I raised an eyebrow. You think I'm ready? She just smiled. I think you already know you are. That Friday, we visited 3 listings. The first was two modern, clean lines, metallic fixtures, everything echoing like a house built for absence. The second smelled of mildew and disappointment. But the third, it was tucked away on a side street near the library, barely visible from the road. A single-story cottage with chipped shutters, a crooked mailbox, and a front porch that sagged like an old woman with stories to tell. Ivy crept up the sides like memory, trying to reclaim its ground. The lawn was patchy. The windows needed replacing. But there was something about it, something defiant in its worn bones. I stepped through the doorway into the living room and stopped. The light was soft, dappled, like it wasn't trying to impress anyone. Then I saw the sunroom. It wasn't big, just a narrow extension at the back with floor-to-ceiling windows and a skylight that let the world spill in. But it felt holy. Dust floated through sunbeams. A robin perched on the fence outside. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Stillness. I turned to Janice and said, "This is it." Her smile was small but full. "It's not much." "No," I agreed. "It's enough." I bought the cottage 2 weeks later. I signed the paperwork with a borrowed pen, my signature trembling slightly on the first form but steadier by the last. The realtor handed me the keys, a simple pair on a frayed blue ribbon, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had stepped out from behind a curtain. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't announce it online. I didn't even post a celebratory photo. The milestone was mine, and mine alone. Moving in was slow and quiet. I brought only what mattered: a few framed photos, the quilt I made from Thomas's old baby clothes, my books, my notebooks, and a cast iron teapot that had survived 2 decades and 1 house fire. Janice brought me basil in a terracotta pot. "Every kitchen needs something green," she said, placing it on the windowsill. The cottage was far from perfect. The floors creaked, the plumbing groaned, the back door stuck. But every flaw felt honest, like the house had lived, too. On my 3rd night, I made tea and curled up in the sunroom with a library book and a wool blanket. The wind scratched gently at the windows. My body ached in familiar places, but my mind was clear. No one was filming me. No one was framing me. I was just Marion. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter. No return address. Postmarked from 2 towns over. My stomach knotted. I knew the handwriting before I opened it.
Claire.
I stood in the hallway with the envelope pressed to my chest for nearly 10 minutes before I slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I read the article. I listened to the podcast. I saw the photos. I don't know if I agree with everything, but I believe you believe it. That was all it said.
No apology. No plea.
Just a sentence with the weight of a truce. Not peace, but pause. At the bottom, scrawled in the margin, a second line. "Thomas asks about you every day. He says the sunroom is lonely without your stories." I didn't cry. I didn't call. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it into a drawer next to my bed, and stared out the sunroom window for a long time. Then I picked up my pen. Not to write back. Not yet. But to write something new. I had been toying with an idea for weeks, sketching it on scrap paper and grocery lists. A small book. Memoir, maybe. Or just memory. I didn't care if anyone read it. I needed to write it for me. The title came to me first, The Space I Made. Each chapter would be a room. The kitchen where I taught Claire to stir batter with both hands. The hallway where I whispered lullabies to Thomas during a storm. The guest room where I used to cry into my pillow after being edited out of another family photo. But also the sunroom, the room I chose. Not assigned, not borrowed. Mine. That afternoon, I took out the notebook I'd packed last. The one with the leather cover and the frayed corner. I flipped past the old grocery lists, the budget notes, the post-surgery reminders, and landed on a blank page. And I wrote, "I am not the villain in her story. I am the narrator of my own." Later that week, I mailed a package to Thomas. Inside was a book, Charlotte's Web, our favorite. I had underlined a single line on the inside flap. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. I included a short note. Dear Thomas, your voice matters. It always has. Don't let anyone turn down its volume, not even the people who love you. I'm here. Always. Love, Grandma. I didn't expect a reply, but I needed him to have something in his hands that told the truth. That night, as I brewed tea and listened to the wind shift outside, I realized something I hadn't felt in months, possibly years. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. Not the house. Not the relationship.
Me.
And I wasn't in a hurry. Some things are worth taking your time with. 2 weeks passed. The cottage had settled into its own rhythm. Old pipes clanking every morning, the radiator sighing at night, the basil plant leaning stubbornly toward the kitchen window. I was learning the sounds, the texture of silence that wasn't cold or weaponized, but soft. Safe. Then Claire showed up at my door. She didn't call ahead. No text. No polite warning. Just a soft knock, 3 taps, unsure. When I opened the door, she stood there in a long coat, hands in her pockets, and a face I hadn't seen in years. Not the one she posted. Not the one from her stories or live streams. Just her, barefaced, tired, and small in a way that made my heart twist. I didn't know where else to go, she said, voice hoarse. I didn't ask why she hadn't called. I didn't ask what brought her. I stepped aside. She walked into my tiny cottage like someone stepping into a memory they hadn't earned back yet. The silence between us stretched long. I made tea. We sat across from each other in the sunroom, the one she said Thomas missed. She looked around. This is really peaceful, she murmured. I nodded. It is. She stared at the floor, fingers twisting in her lap. I read the book you sent him. I didn't flinch. It was his favorite. She hesitated. He's been asking a lot of questions. About what happened. About why you're not around. I folded my hands. What do you tell him? She closed her eyes. That you needed space. That families can break apart for a while, but they don't always stay broken. I nodded once. That's not a bad answer. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. He asked if it was his fault. That landed like a stone on my chest. He said, did Grandma leave because I didn't draw her enough pictures anymore? I stared at the steam rising from my cup. No child should have to ask that. Claire's voice broke. I didn't know what to say. Then say the truth. Her face tightened. What is the truth, Mom? That I'm a liar? A manipulator? That I used you? I didn't respond. Not immediately. Because I wasn't here to wound her. I was here to draw the line between honesty and cruelty and stand on the right side of it. The truth, I said gently, is that you used pieces of me to build a version of yourself that wasn't entirely real. Maybe you didn't mean to, but it hurt just the same. Claire swallowed hard. I thought I was telling my story. You were, but you told it like I didn't have one. We sat in silence. I watched her process that, slowly, like someone tracing their way back through a forest they'd set on fire. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. I brought this. It's not everything, but it's a start. I took it, opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, handwritten.
Messy. Real.
Underneath, clipped together with a paperclip, were 4 checks. Repayments. Not the full amount, but close. Each one marked groceries, utilities, cosign repayment, caretaking support. I looked up. It's not about the money. I know, she said, but it's what I can do right now. I wanted to stop owing you in silence. I tucked the envelope beside me. She stared at the basil plant on the windowsill. Why didn't you scream at me? She asked. Or go public. Tear me down? Everyone else does. Because that's not the point, I said. You destroyed my name quietly. I rebuilt it quietly. That's the justice I wanted. Not attention. Just space to breathe. She nodded slowly. I still don't know how to fix us. You can't. She blinked. Not yet, I said. Fixing something assumes we're trying to get back what we had.
I don't want that.
I want something honest, even if it's smaller. She wiped her cheek. Can I call again? Not for a podcast. not for advice. Just call. Yes, I said. You can. Then I added, but not if it's just to feel better about yourself. Not if it's just a mirror. She nodded. That landed. I could see it. As she stood to leave, she looked around the room one more time. Thomas wants to visit. When it's time, he will. She hesitated at the door. I'm sorry, she said softly. Not just for what I did. For how long I let myself believe it was okay. I nodded. That was the apology I had waited for. Not the words, but the weight behind them. As she walked down the path, I watched from the porch. She looked back once. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just stood there, still, present, whole. When I stepped back inside, the house felt warmer. I sat at my desk and opened the book I was writing. The space I made. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, apologies don't fix broken bones, but they can stop the bleeding. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. That night, I made tea and watched the wind sway the curtains. The basil plant tilted in the breeze. And in the next room, I started writing a chapter not about endings or exposure, but about choosing, finally, to live in a frame I built myself. The final box I unpacked from the move was labeled Unsent Things. It sat in the back of my closet, beneath winter sweaters and a quilt I hadn't touched since before Claire's live streams began reshaping my story. The box contained letters I never mailed, birthday cards I'd bought but never gave, a handful of notes scrawled late at night when I still thought I could explain my way back into being seen. Most of them were to Claire. Some were angry, others desperate. A few so raw they shook in my hands as I reread them, a window into the version of myself who still begged, please understand.
Please see me.
I didn't throw them away. I didn't need to. They didn't carry shame anymore, only memory. I bundled them with string, slid them into the top drawer of my new desk, and closed it slowly. That chapter was closed. Claire and I hadn't spoken again in the month since she stood on my porch. She sent a text once, just a photo of Thomas holding the book I sent, Charlotte's Web, his little finger pointing at the underlined line. Some pig, he'd scribbled on a sticky note beside it. Some grandma. I smiled when I saw it, but I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because not every silence needs to be filled. That was the difference now. I no longer feared silence. I had claimed it. One morning in early spring, I woke to sunlight pouring through the skylight in my sunroom. The ivy along the cottage wall was blooming again. A single purple bloom pushed through the cracks of the fence. I made tea. The basil plant was thriving, crooked and stubborn and alive. The kettle whistled. I let it whistle a moment longer than I should have. That's when Janice called. Your name's in a magazine, she said without preamble. I blinked. What? Modern Elder, she clarified. The piece Carly wrote was republished. They added an epilogue. About you. About women reclaiming space after decades of being rewritten. She paused. There's a quote from you in big print. Something about not needing applause. Just oxygen. I smiled. That sounds like me. Janice laughed. You're a quiet legend, Marion. I'll settle for healed. Later that week, Carly emailed me. She wanted to send a printed copy. Said it was the least she could do after what the story had become. I agreed, but asked her to do one more thing. Remove my quote from the promotional posts. Not because I was ashamed, but because the story was no longer about what I said. It was about what I chose to no longer carry. A few days later, a letter arrived from a woman named Helen, 68, divorced twice. She wrote, my daughter hasn't spoken to me in 4 years. I thought it was because I failed. But after reading your story, I realized it's not always the mother who breaks the bond. Sometimes, it's the myth she can never measure up to. She ended the letter with, I bought myself tulips last week. First time in years. Thank you for reminding me I didn't have to wait for someone else to say I was worth flowers. I cried when I read that. Not for Helen, not even for Claire. For the girl I used to be, the one who waited too long for someone else to light the candles. That night, I walked to the local community center. They were hosting a story circle, an open mic, not for performance, but for reflection.
I didn't plan to speak.
I just wanted to listen. But as I sat among strangers and heard one woman say, "My daughter thinks boundaries mean not loving me anymore," something in me shifted. When the mic came around, I stood. My voice didn't shake. "I'm Marion," I began. "I used to think being a good mother meant being useful."
Quiet.
Unobtrusive. I spent most of my life making room for someone else's spotlight.
A pause.
But then I realized I was the room. I held space. I carried weight. And when they asked me to disappear, I did. But not anymore. I looked at their faces. Open. Waiting. Not for spectacle. For truth. I don't tell this story to win anything. I tell it because someone else might be living the same script, taught that silence is sainthood, that sacrifice is proof of love. But love doesn't erase you. It holds your name in its mouth gently, and it never asks you to shrink. When I finished, no one clapped. That wasn't the rule. Instead, they nodded. A quiet chorus of understanding. That meant more than any applause. On the walk home, the stars came out early. I counted them like I used to with Thomas on the back porch before he learned how to pose for cameras. I whispered the names of constellations he once couldn't pronounce.
Cassiopeia.
Andromeda. The Big Dipper. I hoped someday he'd ask me to name them again. But if he didn't, I'd still be okay. I was no longer waiting for a redemption arc. I was already living the resolution. When I reached my door, I noticed something tucked beneath the doormat. A small envelope. Inside was a folded drawing. Thomas had sketched our sunroom. Inside it, me, seated with a book, the basil plant, the teacup, a small caption in messy print. "She's not just grandma. She's the story keeper." I pressed the drawing to my chest and stood there for a long time, not crying, just grateful. I stepped into the cottage, the space I chose. I lit a single candle, not for anyone else, just for myself. And this time, I made a wish I had never dared before. Let me never again mistake being needed for being seen. Then I blew it out. Not for ceremony, for closure.